What's up, all? As you've probably heard, the next 2 weeks you'll also be out of school, but I have a feeling you guys will start getting some assignments and getting some online distance learning done here shortly. So we're already ahead of schedule. We're doing pretty well, but we're going to start focusing in on the American Civil War. So, first, let's go into the 1860 presidential election. We're going to have four candidates: John Bell from the Constitutional Union Party. The Constitutional Union Party's goal was simple: avoid the slavery issue and keep the country united. So basically, we know slavery exists and we know it's a controversial topic, but we're not going to deal with it. We're not going to answer questions about it. We're just going to avoid it like it's not even there. And that's why we will win the presidential election. Obviously, nobody's heard of John Bell or the Constitutional Union Party, so we know that they weren't successful. The next one was John Breckinridge, who was a Democrat, and the Democrats supported federal slave codes in the territories, supported popular sovereignty of new slave territory, and that means that when a state or a territory enters the United States, the people of that state will vote and decide whether slavery will be legalized in that state. And the Democrats were all for that. Stephen Douglas is going to be a front runner going into the 1860 presidential election. He is also a Democrat, like John Breckinridge. He opposed the federal slave code in the territories, but he also did support popular sovereignty. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting in the Democratic National Convention. And the National Convention is where the political party gets together and they decide who is going to be their candidate for president of the United States. Now, the Democratic and Republican National Conventions in 1860 were pretty wild as far as a bunch of old guys getting together deciding who the president is going to be can get. But why Stephen Douglas is going to be a little bit more interesting as an opponent to Abraham Lincoln in this election is because he splits the Democratic Party into two. And that's why we get two candidates in Breckinridge and Stephen Douglas. All right? So what happens is, why wasn't Douglas the only Democratic candidate? He needed 2/3 of the vote, and he never got that in the Democratic National Convention. So he always came up short of being the solo candidate, the lone candidate for the Democratic Party. And it spans back into 1858 with the Lincoln and Douglas debates that we talked about a little bit before. In one of the debates, and I have this long quote, so bear with me, but Stephen Douglas says, "The next question propounded to me by Mr. Lincoln is, can the people of a territory in any lawful way, against the wishes of any citizen of the United States, exclude slavery from their limits prior to the formation of a state constitution?" Now, Stephen Douglas says here that while popular sovereignty can decide a state's legalization of slavery or not, territories also can. And by doing that, it kind of puts a damper on any of the pro-slavery entities in the South that want to go further west and get territories first, and then bring slavery into that territory, and then it will be easier to pass as a state. So Douglas is kind of veering off from what the Democrats actually believe and saying that no, people can actually vote in territories and say, no, we don't want slavery, and exclude it from the territories. And that's where that division comes between the Democrats and Stephen Douglas. So because of that statement, the Southern pro-slavery citizens didn't really trust Davis. The people that were electing the president didn't really trust Davis. And at the convention, the Southerners felt excluded, and they decided to run their own candidate, which was John Breckinridge. So now you have two Democratic candidates. Stephen Douglas is still a front runner. Next is the Republican candidate, and that was our boy Abraham Lincoln. They prohibited slavery in the territories, and they were okay with containing slavery where it existed at the time. So they weren't about eliminating slavery, and Lincoln wasn't on an election campaign saying, hey, I want to get rid of slavery. Sometimes Abraham Lincoln promoted taking all of the slaves, all the black people in America, and colonizing them in their own lands back in Africa. Now, that's going to change as time goes on. But at the Republican National Convention, we have a similar situation. There was a clear front runner. His name was William Seward, and he was from New York. But again, he did not get the minimum number of votes to get the sole nomination. So what happens in the convention after that is they vote again and again and again, and deals are made. People are exchanging votes for different offices, different roles. And this happens in the Republican National Convention. And it takes 3 votes until Abraham Lincoln, who was kind of a no-name, didn't really win a lot of elections. He got his butt kicked by Stephen Douglas in the Illinois Senate race. He slowly starts to garner some support, garner some power, and then all of a sudden, in the 3rd vote, he surpasses William Seward and becomes the Republican Party's presidential candidate for the 1860 election. So now, what we have is a battle between 2 frontrunners, Stephen Douglas of the Democratic Party and Abraham Lincoln of the Republican Party. But the other 2 candidates, especially Breckinridge, because he's a Democrat, right? They're going to throw a curveball into the 1860 election. Now, as we discussed, this is not the first time that Lincoln and Douglas will square off in politics, right? They fought against each other in a Chicago, I keep saying Chicago for whatever reason, Illinois Senate seat, right? So they've gone after each other. They've had the heated debates. Douglas has always gotten the upper hand. Their rivalry spanned back into Illinois. But they also have another interesting rivalry, and that is into chasing the same woman. Scandalous, right? So your job, simple. Find out what lady had the attention of both Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas while they were both in Illinois. Find out who that lady was. And then, give us some information about who was able to maybe win her over and why. All right? Post it below. Give me an easy TikTok dance to learn, or bust out any other feat of athleticism that you'd like to see me do, because, again, I have to continue to prove my athletic ability to the likes of Giles and Sanzone and all these other guys that question it. So, in the next day or 2, we will keep digging into the 1860 election. We'll focus on Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln as the presidential candidates, and then we'll get into the Civil freaking War, guys. Right? The Civil War. We're there. I know you guys are probably enjoying some downtime, so enjoy it. Not going to hit you with much work as we get really into this formal online learning situation. So rest easy, wash your hands, smile, and I will see you in a couple days.